The most powerful people in history never promised you anything, and that's exactly why you gave them everything. Think about it. Steve Jobs never promised the iPhone would change your life. He just held it up, silent, confident, and you projected every dream, every possibility onto that black rectangle. Napoleon never promised his soldiers glory. He simply walked ahead, and they followed him into hell itself, filling his silence with their own visions of greatness. But here's what disturbs me. What if everything you believe about influence, about persuasion, about getting what you want, is completely backwards? You've been taught to sell yourself, to promise results, to convince others of your value. But what if the secret isn't in what you say, but in what you deliberately refuse to reveal? Welcome to Machiavelli's most dangerous insight, one that kings understood, that modern leaders have forgotten, and that you're about to master. Because right now, as you're watching this, your mind is already filling the void I've created. You're wondering where this leads. You're projecting your own curiosities, your own needs, onto my silence. And that is exactly the point. This is the law of the void. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the most magnetic people never chase. They create space for others to chase them. Your brain is lying to you right now, and it's been doing it your entire life. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time someone refuses to tell you something, your mind doesn't just accept the silence. It goes into overdrive, creating elaborate stories to fill that void. You've experienced this. That person who didn't text you back immediately. Your brain didn't think they're busy. It created a dozen scenarios. They're losing interest. They found someone better. They're testing you. But here's where it gets fascinating. Psychologists call this the projection effect, and it's hardwired into your survival system. When faced with uncertainty, your brain fills the gaps with your deepest desires and fears. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Think about the last time you were truly obsessed with someone. Was it the person who constantly validated you, who promised you the world? Or was it the one who remained mysteriously just out of reach? The one whose thoughts you could never quite read? Your obsession wasn't about them. It was about the story you created about them in that silence. This is why dating apps fail most people. They reveal everything up front. No mystery, no void to fill. But the person who keeps their cards close to their chest, they become irresistible because you're essentially falling in love with your own imagination. Companies understand this better than you think. Apple doesn't tell you what the next iPhone will do. They let you imagine. Tesla doesn't promise delivery dates. They let you dream about the future. The most successful brands create voids that customers eagerly fill with their own aspirations. But here's the question that should terrify you. If this is how your mind works, how many of your strongest attractions, your deepest loyalties, your most passionate pursuits are really just you chasing shadows you created yourself? The void isn't empty. It's full of everything you've ever wanted, and the people who understand this, they don't need to promise you anything. They just need to stay quiet long enough for you to promise everything to yourself. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives running from. We don't follow leaders because of what they promise us. We follow them because of what we imagine they might become. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote something that politicians still whisper about in private. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. But here's the part they don't teach you in school. He wasn't talking about deception. He was talking about strategic ambiguity. Look at history's most magnetic leaders. They mastered the art of being a blank canvas for other people's dreams. Churchill never promised Britain would win the war. He simply declared they would never surrender, leaving the British people to fill that void with their own vision of victory. Gandhi never outlined a detailed plan for independence. He embodied resistance, letting millions project their own hopes onto his silent determination. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think this is about being mysterious for mystery's sake. It's not. It's about understanding that the moment you make a specific promise, you limit yourself to that promise. You become smaller, definable, controllable. When you promise someone exactly what you'll deliver, you've just handed them the measuring stick for your failure. But when you create space, when you let them imagine what's possible, They become invested in outcomes you never even thought of. This is why politicians who speak in generalities often win over those with detailed policy papers. Why spiritual leaders who speak in parables create movements while academics with precise theories gather small followings. The void allows people to see themselves in your vision. If you've made it this far, you're already understanding something most people never will. Hit that like button if this is reshaping how you see influence, and subscribe, because we're just getting started on these uncomfortable truths about human nature. But here's Machiavelli's darkest insight. The void only works if you're genuinely comfortable with uncertainty yourself. If you're anxious to fill the silence, if you're desperate to explain yourself, people sense that weakness immediately. The power comes from being so secure in your own value that you don't need their validation to confirm it. The question isn't whether you can create a void. The question is whether you can resist the urge to fill it yourself. Now let's get practical. Because understanding this principle is useless if you can't apply it to your actual life. You're probably thinking about your relationships right now. That person you've been chasing, explaining yourself to, trying to convince of your worth. What if I told you that every text where you over-explain, every conversation where you justify your feelings, every moment you try to fill their silence, you're actually pushing them away? Here's what happens in your brain when someone constantly explains themselves to you. You stop wondering about them. The mystery dies, and with it, the attraction. But the person who responds with interesting instead of a paragraph, who says we'll see instead of making promises, they've just created a void that your mind will obsess over for hours. In your career, this translates to something even more powerful. The employee who promises to work weekends, who guarantees specific results, who explains exactly how they'll solve every problem. They've just made themselves predictable, replaceable. But the one who says, "I'll handle it," and then delivers something unexpected, they become indispensable because their colleagues can't quite figure out how they do what they do. Social media has turned this principle upside down. Everyone's sharing everything, promising authenticity, explaining their every thought. But scroll through your feed right now. Who actually captures your attention? It's not the person posting their entire life story. It's the one whose posts make you wonder what they're not saying. The most magnetic people on social platforms understand this instinctively. They share enough to intrigue, but never enough to satisfy. They leave comments that make you want to know more. They post photos that tell half a story. They've turned their entire online presence into a carefully crafted void. But here's where it gets dangerous for your mental health. You need to recognize when others are using this on you. That friend who never quite commits to plans but somehow always gets you to chase them. That romantic interest who gives just enough attention to keep you hooked, but never enough to feel secure. That influencer who promises transformation, but never quite explains how. The difference between healthy boundaries and manipulation is intent. Are you creating space because you're secure in your worth, or because you're trying to control others? Are you comfortable with uncertainty, or are you weaponizing it? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll start noticing it everywhere. In your relationships, your workplace, your social interactions. The question becomes, will you use this knowledge to become more authentic or more manipulative? We've reached the moment of truth. Everything you've learned means nothing if you walk away unchanged. Right now, you're at a crossroads. You can close this video and go back to over-explaining yourself, chasing validation, filling every silence with nervous chatter. Or you can step into something far more powerful, the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. But let me be brutally honest with you. This isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's not about playing games or manipulating people. It's about something far more profound, becoming so secure in your own value that you don't need constant confirmation from others. Think about the last week of your life. How many times did you over-explain a decision? How many times did you justify your feelings to someone who didn't ask? How many times did you fill an uncomfortable silence because you couldn't bear the uncertainty? Here's your first exercise. For the next 24 hours, practice strategic silence. When someone asks how your day was, instead of launching into a detailed explanation, try "it was good" and see what happens. When someone criticizes you, instead of defending yourself immediately, Try, "I'll think about that," and watch how the dynamic shifts. You'll be amazed at what people reveal when you stop filling the void for them. But here's the deeper transformation. You're going to discover that most of your anxiety comes from trying to control other people's perceptions of you. When you stop doing that, when you let them think whatever they want to think, something magical happens. You become free. The people who are meant to understand you will. The people who aren't, well, their opinion was never going to matter anyway. If you've made it this far, you're already different from who you were 15 minutes ago. You've seen behind the curtain of human psychology. You understand something that most people will never grasp. Drop the word void in the comments if this has shifted something fundamental in how you see yourself and others. I want to know you were here for this moment of transformation. You've just absorbed knowledge that kings and queens spent lifetimes learning. But here's my final challenge to you. Don't just understand this principle. Embody it. Become the person who doesn't need to chase because others naturally gravitate toward your quiet confidence. Become the person who doesn't need to promise everything because your presence speaks louder than words ever could. In a world of endless noise, your silence becomes the ultimate rebellion. In a culture of constant explanation, your mystery becomes magnetic. In an age of desperate validation seeking, your self-assurance becomes revolutionary. The void isn't empty. It's full of infinite possibility. And now, it's yours to master.